Hello students. I am so excited to start Enemy Brothers with you. It has been my favorite children's book ever since I read it in 6th grade. So I'm so excited that you get to read it. I hope you'll enjoy it. I can't wait to read through it with you and talk through some of the characters in here and the storyline and the plot. It's just a very fun read and wonderfully written. The author is very talented, and I have recently acquired some more of the author's books, and they're each very fun, very sweet reads. So I'm very excited to get started with you. I hope that yesterday you watched the short little World War II introduction videos. That is the setting for our book. It is in World War II, and then within that it is specifically in the Blitz of England. And so that is what we are, the time that we're entering into. It was a terrifying time. People didn't know what was going to happen one day to the next. And they could be like you watched in the videos, every single night almost they had bombs dropped on any major cities or even large cities, and especially cities close to a ammunitions storage area, which is where they would keep any of their supplies that they needed for the war. And so in Britain at this time, it was a devastating time. There's some stories that I'm sure you've read that take place also during this time. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. At the very beginning of the story, the Pevensey children are sent away. They're evacuated from their London home because of the air raids. They sent many children out of the larger cities and into the country so that they would be safe. And that is the whole setting for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The Pevensey kids leave their London home and end up staying in this large house with a professor in the country, and that's where they find the wardrobe and all. So this is the same setting, and we will meet some evacuated children. The family that we're going to read about does host evacuees in their house as well, and all those different kinds of difficulties that come up that we might never imagine having come up. There's some terminology I want you to know in this book, and the first one that we're going to encounter pretty quickly is the Hitler Youth. So this obviously was in Germany. Adolf Hitler was the leader of Germany at this time. He was the one leading World War II and planning it, and the one that started it. And he started within the country because if you teach children something, they'll grow up believing that and investing in it, and then they become the new people who carry on those traditions or those beliefs. So he knew that, he recognized that, and thought, well, if I teach the kids this, then it'll catch on. So he instituted something called Hitler Youth, and essentially it's the Boy Scouts of or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts of Germany. But it became a requirement where every child had to participate in it, and it was both during school, but it was primarily an after-school program that they would go to, where they would learn chants and songs that exalted and taught them the right that Germany had to conquer the world, to rule the world, to be the domineering nation. They would learn lots of what we would call propaganda, things that the government was trying to instill in them to make them believe. They would exercise, they had a uniform, and they took great pride in it, much like when we read in Tom Sawyer and he wanted to be a part of the Temperance Cadets because he wanted to wear the uniform. Well, these children that participated in Hitler Youth had these uniforms as well, and they take great pride in them. And so that's the uniform, that's the Jungvolk that we're going to see our character wearing at the beginning of this story. There'll be lots of German words that pop up throughout the story, and most of them are defined for you. Others are not, and I'll let you know what those are as we get there. But there'll be some terms that you're not quite familiar with, and that's okay. You can either look them up, or I'll try to let you know as we read too. Another term that you heard about in the video you watched yesterday about the Blitz are blackouts and air raids. So air raids would be when the German planes would come in to bomb the cities, and it would happen at night because otherwise the anti-aircraft guns could see them coming during the day and fend them off. But they would come at night where they couldn't be seen and bomb the cities. And so in response to that, one of the things that the cities imposed was a blackout curfew. And they could, by the time it was dark outside every house light could not be seen outside. So you couldn't have car lights on. There was only if they took a flashlight outside, it had to be covered, or they call it frosted, so that it doesn't emanate very much light. But they had these heavy, thick blackout curtains, or they would put wooden slats over windows or things like that at night, so that a plane driving over couldn't see, oh, there's a bunch of lights, I'm going to drop a bomb on it. It was blackout and nobody could see. So that's one of the things we're going to read about, along with the air raids. You heard about the air raid shelters, which most homes had. The other term that you heard in yesterday's video called the Blitz was the initials RAF. The RAF stands for the Royal Air Force. And our main character in Enemy Brothers flies for the Royal Air Force. And so they just call it the RAF, and that's just a term that you'll need to know. And you heard about it yesterday too. Other things that you need to know about this book are it starts off seeming like it might be a mystery, but pretty quickly we find it's not actually a mystery. And so don't read it expecting it to be a mystery, because then you'll be disappointed. You learn the answer to the mystery pretty quickly. And so then the rest of the book is just about, how do we solve this problem that we have now? What's going to happen to the characters involved? So those are things that I want you to look for. The author's name is Miss Constance Savory, and she has written hundreds of children's books. This is the only one that's still at least reasonably easy to get a hold of in the US. It's actually quite difficult to get a hold of her books. They're no longer in print. There's one that's an ebook, and it's called The Rebs and the Red Coat. Sorry. It takes place during the American War for Independence, but it actually takes place in Britain, where a redcoat American has been captured and is being held prisoner in Britain. You can get it on an ebook, and it's a short little read. It's a fun read, but that's a good one to get a hold of. The rest of her books are really difficult to get a hold of. I've looked for several years. When I went to England this summer, I went into every bookstore that I came across to try to find more of her books, because I hoped they'd be more readily available there, and couldn't find any. Couldn't find them in used bookstores. I finally asked in a major bookstore, and they just said, you're going to have to just look for them available online by a collector or something like that. So I actually received a couple of her books this last Christmas and got to read them, and they were very fun as well. But she is a Christian author who writes in World War II. She's British, and this book was published in 1943 originally. So that's actually before World War II ended. She published this book for the children of her time to read, to be encouraged by, to find joy in, to find distraction in from what they were reading and hearing at the time. And we'll see, she loves literature. She loves poetry. She loves hymns. She loves psalms. And we'll see that come up in several of her characters throughout the book as the children are encouraged to memorize poems, psalms, songs, just to combat the scariness of the time that they were living in, with the possibility of bombs being dropped on their houses at night and on their friends or on their school. It was a very, very scary time that I don't think we can imagine, but and yet has some applicability to our current time. She just encourages them to take refuge in those. So I encourage you to do that as well. This book also includes a lot of what we might call visual imagery throughout it. There's a few consistent themes in the writing or the language that she uses that come up throughout the book. The one is this idea of blue color, or it comes up in the sea, it comes up in the character's eyes, or in the sky quite often, and usually is representing honesty or fairness or goodness in the color of that. One of the other things that come up is this idea of gray or mist or fog. Comes up quite often, and again you'll see that in times of struggle, in times when the characters are upset or worried or concerned about something. So keep an eye out for that. Another thing that we're going to see consistently contrasted throughout this book is good versus evil. what is good, what defines good. Just because we've been told by someone else that it's good, does that make it good, or is there another standard? And of course, we know there is a standard for good. We know that God gave us the scriptures to be that standard for good. So that's what she is constantly setting, is again and again the standard of goodness, the standard of truth. And the characters are going to struggle with that, though. So I don't want to give you much more information before you go ahead and read it. And I would like to have you, I'm going to start it off for you just because I can't not read you the first few pages of my favorite book that we read all year. But then I'll have you go ahead and with the rest of your literature time today, finish reading chapter 1, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. It's okay if it's a little bit confusing to start off with, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. So I'll read the first few pages of it and let you finish it, and then we'll talk about it tomorrow. So, Enemy Brothers by Constance Savory. Chapter 1, go ahead and open up your books too. Chapter 1, Out of the Gray North Sea. A young man in Air Force blue stood by the window of a hotel lounge, staring out at a gray world. The gray streets of a gray town, under a gray sky with a gray sea beyond it. Streets and sky and sea had to be taken on trust, for all that could be seen was dense gray mist. And the sea sighed and the fog rose up sheer, a wall of nothing at the world's last edge, murmured the young man. He turned back into the empty room and sat down by the fire. Taking a folded sheet of paper and a tinted photograph from the end flap of a shabby leather pocketbook, he studied them closely. On the paper was a child's colored pencil drawing of a house with a high-peaked roof. Red and blue flowers sparkled in the window boxes. A balcony with curly balusters decorated every story. Fluted pillars flanked the front door, and pargeted plaster urns, laurel wreaths, and fat dangling tassels filled the space between one window and the next. A dachshund sat under a linden tree on the grass plot in which heart-shaped beds had been cut for roses. Tree, flower beds, and dog appeared to be sliding down a steep hill toward small garden railings near the foot of the sheet. The airman's half-smile died away as he looked at the photograph. It showed the head and shoulders of a boy of 10, with the name Tony written beneath in a woman's upright foreign hand. The little face that laughed up at the airman might well have belonged to a younger brother. The likeness between them was not confined to their dark brown hair and blue-gray eyes. Had a dozen years been taken from the elder's age, it might not have been easy to tell them apart. So note there, the boy in the photograph and the young man looking at the photograph look very similar, just different ages. The airman's keen gaze rested for some moments on the boy. Then, sighing, he returned the photograph and sketch to the pocketbook. "Poor old Tony," he muttered. "I wonder what you've become." He sat for a long time, deep in thought. Then he glanced at his wristwatch, flung himself back in the chair, and within 2 minutes was asleep, his head pillowed on his arm. Flames crackled on the hearth beyond the glass doors. Figures flitted to and fro in the entrance hall. From the unseen harbor came muffled sea sounds. Half an hour later, 2 midshipmen hurled themselves into the room, wide awake in an instant, and the sleeper started to his feet. So a midshipman is the lowest ranking officer. He's still an officer, but he's the lowest ranking officer on a naval ship. So they're in the Navy. The newcomer stood looking at him reproachfully. And is that all the welcome you have for 2 young heroes, Flying Officer George Demry Ingleford? Your beloved brother Ginger and his dearest friend Lancelot rush into your arms, fresh from their valiant exploits. And what sort of a welcome do they get? None whatever, 'cause you're asleep at this hour of the day, you lazy beggar Dem. The young man grinned. "Sorry," he said. "I'm tired." "Been busy lately?" "Much as usual. What have you been up to?" They looked at him with mock severity. "We are the strong, silent Navy. We don't rush about, shouting the names of the places we've visited lately. We leave the RAF to do all the talking. We've been dodging round here, there, and everywhere in the icy North Sea. Icy North, ugh. 2 more easy chairs were drawn up to the fire. Dim rang the bell for coffee, and the brothers looked into each other's eyes and smiled. It was their first meeting since the outbreak of war. All well at home? All well. Decent of you to come all this way on a bare chance of meeting me, Dim. Must have cost you a fortune. Well, what could I do when I had to leave and a whisper that you might be here at a given time? It didn't cost me anything. Cousin Olive insisted on franking me. She's an old trump. She is, Dim agreed, speaking as though the words and thoughts had drifted apart. I'm going to pause there and explain just a couple things. An old trump is a good thing. She's a joy. She's a good friend, something like that. And then Cousin Olive insisted on franking me. She paid for it, paid for him to come. Okay, I'm going to let you finish the chapter there, and then we will talk about the rest of it tomorrow.